Imagine a country where 96.3% of adults are considered literate.
Right. You hear that and you immediately think, okay, solid foundation.
Exactly. You picture a modern, knowledge-based economy. But, and here is the hook for you listening today, turn the page of the data, and there's a statistic that it completely shatters that assumption.
Yeah, it's a massive contradiction.
In that exact same country, a staggering 90.9% of children at the end of primary school are classified as living in, quote, learning poverty.
Which means they can, look at a page or recognize the letters and perhaps sound out the syllables. But they cannot read and actually comprehend a simple age-appropriate text. They're just decoding symbols without extracting any actual meaning.
Wow. That contradiction, that's our starting point today.
Right.
Welcome to our deep dive.
Yeah.
We are unpacking a really comprehensive, multi-dimensional data analysis report.
Yeah, tracking the national development of the Philippines from 1960 all the way to 2023.
Right, and we have sourced stacks of data for this.
Yeah.
World Bank metrics, UN population stats, IMF economic indicators.
Yeah. Covering everything from fixed broadband subscriptions to public health.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the human capital trap. We want to look at the structural challenges hiding beneath the surface of what, appears to be a high-growth, highly resilient economy.
What's fascinating here is that the specific gap between the appearance of development, like a 96% literacy rate, and the reality of human capability is the absolute perfect entry point.
Yeah, a lens to view the whole country.
Right. It helps us understand a country caught in the throes of a very complex transition. It shows us how raw macroeconomic data can project one image, while human-level development data reveals a completely different set of structural vulnerabilities.
I want to set the stage for you listening. This isn't merely a profile of a single nation in Southeast Asia.
Not at all.
The dynamics we are going to explore, the struggle to build infrastructure, the reliance on service jobs over manufacturing, the demographic ticking clock.
Yeah.
These are forces reshaping developing economies all over the globe. It's really a masterclass in how economic data can tell a completely different story than human development data.
Absolutely.
And as a quick note, while the data we're reviewing today obviously touches on systemic policies, governance, and, corruption, our goal is to impartially report the numbers and the historical mechanisms driving them.
Right. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoint or taking sides.
No, we are simply following the data to understand how this economy actually functions, just reporting the numbers exactly as they appear in the source material.
And the macroeconomic picture is really the best place to start because it immediately presents another set of dualities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where are they currently classified?
Currently, international financial institutions classify the Philippines as a lower middle income country within the East Asia Pacific region.
But when you look at the raw growth of their gross national income, or GNI, the scale up is, it's massive.
It really is.
In 1960, the national income was roughly $7.4 billion. Fast forward to 2023, and that figure has ballooned to $521.7 billion.
Which is a staggering jump.
You look at a multiplier like that, and it seems like an undisputed economic triumph.
It is a monumental increase in the absolute size of the economic pie, for sure. But the friction lies in the country's income bracket classification.
Right.
Despite moving from $7 billion to over $500 billion, the nation has been painfully slow to elevate out of that lower middle income tier.
So the wealth is there, but
The absolute wealth has grown, yes, but the per capita wealth generation and the structural sophistication of the economy haven't kept pace with the population.
well, with neighboring economies, right?
Exactly, like the tiger economies that started at similar baselines back in the 1960s.
And the historical journey to that 521 billion wasn't, a smooth upward curve either.
Oh, definitely not.
The GDP growth history shows intense volatility paired with a really stubborn resilience. Like if you look at the mid-1980s,
Yeah, 1984 and 1985.
the data shows a punishing economic contraction, plummeting to negative 7.0% and negative 6.9%.
Huge hits.
And then, during the 2020 pandemic shock, the economy took a historic plunge, hitting negative 9.5%.
I mean, a near 10% contraction in a single year is devastating.
Yeah.
It wipes out years of gradual developmental gains in a matter of months.
But the recovery mechanism is what really stands out here.
Right. Following that 2020 crash, the economy didn't stagnate. By 2022, the GDP growth rate rocketed up to 7.6%.
It's like a rubber band that gets stretched to its absolute breaking point. It snaps back violently, but it never seems to break.
That's a perfect analogy. The Philippines takes heavy macroeconomic hits from external shocks. Whether it's a global financial crisis, a pandemic, or severe climate events, the impact is deep.
But they bounce back.
Always. The
Yep.
internal consumption engine revs right back up. The recovery momentum is extraordinarily strong.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate
Go
here.
for it.
If the economy is growing from $7 billion to over $500 billion, and it has this proven ability to violently snap back from crises, why is the country still locked in the lower middle income tier?
That is the big question.
I mean, 7.6% growth rate is the envy of most developed nations. Where is all that money going? And why isn't it propelling the average citizen into a higher income bracket?
To understand why the bracket is stagnant despite the massive growth, we have to look at the mechanics of how the money is being made.
Okay.
It comes down to a highly unusual structural anomaly in the Philippine economy. When we study national development, there is a standard, historically proven sequence.
Right, the usual path.
Exactly. A nation starts with an agriculture-based economy. Over time, it leverages cheap labor to build factories, industrializing and manufacturing physical goods for export.
Making stuff, basically.
Right. And once it accumulates sovereign wealth and builds out heavy infrastructure through manufacturing, it slowly transitions into a service-based economy.
You move from the farm to the factory floor to the office building. That is the playbook we saw in the US, the UK, Japan, South Korea.
But the Philippine data shows they essentially skip the factory floor entirely.
Wow.
They bypass the traditional industrialization phase. If you break down the 2023 data, the service sector is the absolute core engine, accounting for an enormous 63.2% of the GDP.
And back in 1960, services were only at 43.1%.
Right. Meanwhile, industry, which includes manufacturing and construction, is hovering at 27.7%, having actually retreated from historical highs.
And agriculture.
Agriculture has continually shrunk as a share of GDP, down to about 9% now. Yet it remains a severe efficiency bottleneck.
Why is it a bottleneck if it's shrinking?
Because it still holds a disproportionately large portion of the national labor force despite its low output. You have a significant percentage of the population working in agriculture, generating very little economic value relative to the service sector.
Oh, I see. It's like a student skipping middle school and going straight to high school. It is impressive they can handle some of the coursework, but they're going to struggle because they missed all the foundational math. Having a service-driven economy at 63% is a profile you usually only see in post-industrial, fully developed nations.
It is a major anomaly. The Philippines leapfrogged manufacturing and moved millions of workers directly into services, most notably the business process outsourcing sector, or BPO.
Call centers, IT support, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Virtual assistants, medical billing for overseas corporations. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this lack of an industrial base explains the vulnerability to external shocks we discussed earlier.
Because they aren't producing hard goods.
Right. Without physical exports to anchor the economy, you are entirely dependent on global demand for your services.
But how does a country sustain consumer spending in a massive service sector? Retail, restaurants, real estate, if it isn't manufacturing and exporting physical goods at a high volume?
That's the crux of it.
If you aren't selling cars or electronics to the rest of the world, where's the underlying capital coming from to fuel all this domestic consumption?
The answer to that lies in a unique financial blood transfusion that the Philippines relies on. It reveals the real secret behind its gross national income.
Okay, this is where we have to look at the secret behind that $521 billion GNI figure. There is a persistent structural gap in the data between GDP and GNI.
We should probably clarify those terms for everyone.
Right. As a quick refresher, GDP is the value of everything produced physically inside the country's borders. GNI is the total income claimed by the residents, regardless of where in the world it was earned.
And in many developing nations, GDP and GNI are fairly close. Often GDP is actually higher because foreign corporations are manufacturing inside the country and sending the profits back to their home nations.
But the Philippine data shows the exact opposite.
Yeah.
In 2023, the GDP was $437 billion. But the GNI was significantly higher at $521.7 billion.
That is nearly an $85 billion gap.
And that money isn't being produced by domestic factories or local software companies.
No, that continuous positive net primary income inflow is the result of overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs.
The blood transfusion.
Think of it as a funnel or a leaky bucket in reverse. External funds are continuously pouring into the domestic economy. This external lifeline acts as a prop for local final consumption.
Because millions of Filipinos are working globally.
Exactly. As nurses in Europe, construction workers in the Middle East, engineers in North America, or staff on international cruise ships, they send a huge portion of their paychecks back home to their families.
Which prove an immense structural reliance on exporting labor rather than goods.
Precisely.
Imagine if, 15% of your total household income didn't come from your actual job, but was mailed to you every month by a relative living abroad.
It would definitely change your spending habits.
It's fantastic for paying the bills and keeping the local grocery stores in business.
Hmm.
But it fundamentally means your own house isn't generating enough intrinsic value on its own to sustain its lifestyle.
And that is exactly what props up the service sector. All that remittance money comes in, and families use it to buy food, pay for school, go to the mall, which creates service jobs domestically.
But exporting labor requires people. What happens when the demographics of the country start to shift?
Well, the data indicates that a tectonic shift is actually already underway.
Oh.
If we compare the national population pyramid from 1960 to the one in 2022, the structure of the society has completely transformed.
Okay, let's look at the dependency ratio. This measures the burden on the working age population, right?
Yes. It calculates how many children and elderly people every working adult has to economically support.
Back in 1960, the total age dependency ratio was a crushing 102.5%.
Which means for every working adult, there was more than one dependent to feed, clothe, and shelter.
At a household level, a 102% dependency ratio makes wealth accumulation basically impossible.
Absolutely impossible. Every peso earned goes toward immediate survival. There's zero surplus for savings, investment, or higher education.
But the 2022 data shows that ratio plummeted to 50.1%. The burden was effectively cut in half.
And this introduces the concept of the demographic dividend.
Right.
The Philippines is currently in its golden window. The labor force has the lightest burden of dependence in the nation's history.
It's the same demographic profile that let countries like South Korea and Japan execute their economic miracles.
Exactly. A massive army of workers suddenly has surplus income to save in banks, which banks then lend out to build infrastructure and factories.
But wait, if the dependency ratio has dropped so dramatically, why are you framing this as a ticking clock?
Because while the total dependency is at a historic low, aging is slowly creeping in.
Ah, I see.
The old age dependency ratio, the burden of the elderly on the workforce, has climbed steadily from 4.5% to 5.2%.
But 5.2% still sounds incredibly low compared to aging societies in, say, Europe or East Asia.
It is low today, but the upward trend is the ultimate warning sign. Demographic shifts take time, but once that aging curve accelerates, it is virtually impossible to reverse.
Right.
This window is strictly temporary. The nation must complete its industrial or service upgrade before the population gets too old. If a country grows old before it grows rich, they get permanently stuck in that middle income trap.
Because you lose the tax base required to support a massive elderly population.
Exactly.
So the workforce is at its peak size right now. But if the economy relies on human capital, services and overseas workers, and the workforce is at its maximum potential size right now, how capable is this workforce?
That is the million-dollar question.
Are they actually prepared for a globalized, high-tech future?
That specific question leads us to the most alarming data in the entire report, and it brings us right back to the paradox we started with, the state of education.
The education illusion. We have desks full of students, but minds left empty. Let's look at the quantity success first, because logistically, they've done a lot.
They have. The sheer scale of coverage is impressive.
Primary gross enrollment has stayed above 100% for years, and net enrollment reached 93.8% in 2021, and gender equality is high.
Actually, primary female enrollment is 104.6%, slightly higher than boys.
So everyone basically has a school to go to. The physical infrastructure of schooling has successfully scaled to meet the population.
But, and this is a massive but, access to a classroom does not equal the acquisition of skills.
Right.
The data reveals a severe hollowing out of the education system. The attendance is logged, the seats are filled, but the actual transfer of knowledge has collapsed.
Because the learning poverty rate is a catastrophic 90.9%.
Yes.
At the end of primary school, 90.4% lack basic reading proficiency. And the gender gap here flips. Boys are faring even worse, with a learning poverty rate of 92.1% compared to 89.7% for girls.
To quantify the economic impact of this, the report uses the Human Capital Index, or HCI.
Let's break that down.
The HCI calculates the future productivity of a child born today compared to what their productivity could be if they enjoyed complete education and full health. In 2020, the Philippines scored a 0.52 on this index.
And despite a really high under 5 survival rate of 0.97, meaning kids are surviving early childhood, their education-adjusted years of learning are drastically lower than the nominal years they spend sitting in school.
Exactly. A student might be physically present in the system for years, but they are only receiving a fraction of that in measurable, applicable learning.
So what does this all mean? Let's translate that HCI for you listening.
Yeah.
It means a child born today in the Philippines will only achieve 52% of their maximum productive potential.
Right.
They're starting life with a 48% handicap in the global economy.
And when you map that reality onto the economic structure we analyzed earlier, a 63% service-driven economy reliant on BPOs and exported labor, the implications are just staggering.
Wait, if the country's main export is human labor and the primary economic driver is the service sector, isn't a 91% learning poverty rate an absolute existential threat to their entire economic model?
It is the ultimate bottleneck. If your only engine is human capital and your human capital is operating at barely half capacity, your economic ceiling is locked in place.
You can't transition from basic customer service call centers to high-value tech services.
No, you can't. You can't move into software engineering, financial analysis, or medical research if the foundational comprehension isn't there from primary school.
Which leaves them stuck in the lowest-tier service jobs globally.
The exact jobs most vulnerable to automation and artificial intelligence over the next decade.
Wow.
And human capital isn't just cognitive either, it is deeply physical. The report dedicates a massive section to public health, and it paints a picture of half a century of incredible triumphs, overshadowed by a hidden time bomb.
Let's look at the triumphs first. The long-term health metrics really do show phenomenal progress. Life expectancy jumped from 59.2 years in 1960 to 70.1 years in 2019.
Which is a huge leap in quality of life.
Yeah. There's a brief COVID-19 dip to 66.7 in 2021, but the long-term trend is solid. And under 5 mortality crashed dramatically from 101.0 per thousand to just 26.9.
Public health infrastructure figured out how to keep infants and children alive. They rolled out vaccines, improved sanitation, and educated mothers. The traditional mid-20th century diseases were largely controlled.
But the hidden crisis is terrifying. While those traditional diseases are controlled, HIV infections are on an exponential, alarming curve.
The raw numbers represent a massive, tragic irony. In 1990, there were only 100 new HIV infections annually.
Just 100.
Right. By 2010, that crept up to 2,200. But by 2023, it skyrocketed to 31,000 new infections in a single year.
31,000. And the demographic breakdown is what's really scary. A massive portion of these new infections are among adolescents and youth, ages 15 to 24.
It shows that while the system conquered mid-century problems, it is utterly failing at modern public health messaging and prevention.
The data is practically flashing red here. The very youth who are suffering from the education deficit are now facing a severe, unchecked health epidemic.
This raises an important question. How does a surging health crisis among the youth compound the human capital crisis we just saw in the education sector?
It's a dual assault. You're simultaneously eroding the cognitive capability and the physical health of the generation that is supposed to carry the economy forward.
Exactly, right before the demographic dividend window slams shut.
We've established that human capital is struggling on both fronts. But what about the physical and digital capital? If someone does manage to overcome these hurdles, what is the infrastructure like for the businesses trying to operate here?
The data here exposes the shackles holding back the entire service economy. We can start with the digital divide.
Okay, the internet usage numbers have skyrocketed, right? From 2% in 2000 to 73.6% today. Mobile connectivity is ubiquitous. Everybody has a smartphone.
Yes, mobile is everywhere. However, fixed broadband subscriptions are abysmal. Only 6.4 per 100 people.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Everybody has a smartphone, but almost nobody has the hardwired connection needed to run a global tech business from their home.
Exactly. You cannot transition a business process outsourcing sector into high-value digital services if you rely on mobile data.
Right, 4G isn't enough to run heavy cloud architecture.
No. You need robust, unmetered, fixed broadband in homes and offices to compete globally.
And what about the physical energy infrastructure?
The country is actually moving backward on green energy. It's a severe energy bottleneck.
Backward. How?
Fossil fuel generation has surged from 54.6% in 1990 to roughly 77.8% recently.
Wow.
Yeah. Renewable energy has almost halved in its share, dropping from 45.4% in 1990 to just 22.7% in 2021.
Why is the infrastructure lagging so far behind the economic growth? I mean, with a $500 billion economy, is there a lack of money to build it, or is something else getting in the way?
Well, the heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels is a huge factor. It acts as a direct driver of high inflation, essentially acting as a tax on the entire economy.
Because they have to buy oil and coal on the global market.
Right, but to fully answer your question about why it's lagging, we have to look at the weight of debt and the actual cost of doing business.
Okay, let's look at the debt. Total external debt has ballooned from around $2.2 billion in the early 1970s to $125.3 billion in 2023.
That is a massive amount of national capital flowing out just to service interest payments rather than being invested in fiber optics or green grids.
And the business environment itself is fraught with friction. 28.3% of businesses report being asked for a bribe when interacting with officials.
Over a quarter of businesses face direct corruption just to operate.
And access to finance is severely restricted. Only 20.1% of enterprises have a bank loan or a line of credit.
When we synthesize this data remaining strictly objective here, the combination of high national debt, steep governance friction like bribes, and the inability for private businesses to secure loans creates a massive chilling effect on private investment.
Which perfectly explains the lack of infrastructure investment and the failure to industrialize that we discussed in the earlier sections.
Precisely. The friction costs are simply too high for heavy industry to thrive.
Let me pull all these threads together. So an entrepreneur faces bad internet, expensive fossil fuel power, struggles to get a bank loan, might have to pay a bribe, and then has to hire from a talent pool where 90% suffered from learning poverty.
That is the daily reality reflected in the numbers.
It makes that 7.6% GDP rebound look like an absolute miracle of human resilience.
It really is a testament to the sheer adaptability of the population and those overseas workers keeping the capital flowing inward.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's distill this report into the crucial takeaways. For the Philippines to cross the middle income trap, what are the three keys?
Based on everything we've covered, the first is a shift from quantity to quality in education. Eradicating that 91% learning poverty is the ultimate prerequisite for global competitiveness.
Because you can't build a 21st century economy on a 52% human capital capacity.
Exactly. Second, they need to upgrade the hard infrastructure, slashing fossil fuel reliance and building out fixed broadband to lower the cost of doing business. This will allow the service sector to level up.
And the third key?
Arresting emerging social crises, rapidly addressing the exponential spike in HIV among the youth before the demographic dividend window slams shut completely.
The data really tells a story that challenges our basic assumptions about national success. We often measure progress by the number of jobs created or the amount of money flowing across borders.
Or how many people own smartphones.
Right. But building an economy on remittances and mobile phones without investing in the mines and fixed infrastructure of the home country is like building a skyscraper on sand.
The foundations simply cannot support the weight of future growth.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. The future of the Philippines, and perhaps many other developing nations in the 21st century, doesn't depend on creating more work.
No, it doesn't.
It depends entirely on whether they can cultivate a smarter, healthier, and more empowered next generation before their demographic clock runs out. Because once that population ages, the opportunity to build that solid foundation might be gone forever. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.